Ah, kids, come on in, gather round the fire. Tonight, I have a story to tell you. Once upon a time, centuries ago, there was a people who burst forth from the depths of Asia like wild winds. The Huns, they were the brave warriors of the vast steppes. The sound of their horses' hooves hitting the ground was so fast and thunderous that you'd think a storm was raging in the skies. Living on the plains toughened their hearts. They learned to battle both nature and other people. The Huns were the children of these unforgiving lands. They were so fierce that when their enemies heard them coming, they trembled with fear. But every people has a purpose, right? The Huns didn't just want to hunt or fight. They were filled with the desire to build an empire that stretched from east to west, from north to south. All of Europe would echo with the intense sounds of their horses' hooves. At first they were just a small tribe, yes, but what a strong spirit they had. Roaming freely across the vast plains, gazing at the endless horizon made them unstoppable. They advanced toward Europe using the great migration routes. At first the Romans may not have even heard their name, but soon terror began to light up their eyes. Because the Huns weren't just warriors, they were also diplomats, forming alliances and outsmarting their rivals with their strategic cunning. Before long, their name began to resonate across Europe. The Huns, arriving like a storm. The peoples of Europe, those other tribes they called barbaric. Even they felt helpless against the Huns, Vandals, Visigoths, Gepids. All trembled in the shadow of this great power. Even before Attila, their leader, had filled their hearts with fear. But wait. This story is really about Attila, because Attila, he was the great warrior known as God's whip. The leader who would bring all of Europe to its knees, born in the midst of this storm. But first, we need to understand the foundations of this empire. How did the Huns become so powerful? Listen closely, the Huns had very different battle tactics. While other barbarian tribes in Europe fought with shields and swords, the Huns attacked like the wind with their bows and arrows. Does the enemy have a shield? They'd shoot an arrow from the sky, it would fly over the shield and strike right at the heart. In that boundless freedom of the steppes, the Huns grew up to be both warriors and strategists. They advanced deep into the heart of Europe, spreading fear wherever they went. And they never stopped. Slowly but surely they grew stronger, and everyone from the Slavs in the north to the Germans in the west felt their presence. They began with small raids, but with each passing day these raids became more organized. Each new campaign built on the success of the last. Finally, a leader would rise. The Hun Empire was now dreaming bigger dreams, because that great warrior who would lead them was about to step onto the stage of history. His name would be Attila. But our story is just beginning, isn't it? Come a little closer to the fire, because I have much more to share with you. My children, gather around the fire because I'm about to tell you the story of one of history's most powerful warriors, Attila. I'll share how he was as a child, how he grew up, and eventually transformed into an emperor. Attila's birth and childhood may seem ordinary today, but for the people of that time it was like fate playing its hand. Now close your eyes and let's journey back to those distant steppes. Attila was born in the vast grasslands of the Huns. These lands would be both a refuge and a teacher for him. At that time, the Huns were a nomadic people. They moved like the wind, flowed like water, and struck their enemies like a storm. And Attila grew up in the midst of this tribe, under the shadows of great tents. His family wasn't just any family. His father, Munzuk, was a powerful man from the royal lineage of the Huns, a leader in his own right. But more importantly, it was the blood running through Attila's veins that mattered. He was a child carrying the spirit of both a warrior and a leader. This childhood would prepare him for the grand aspirations he would pursue later. Even as a child, Attila was different. He grew up alongside his brother Bleda, but he always seemed a step ahead. Even at a young age, he stood out with his intelligence and warrior spirit. Life on the steppes wasn't easy. It was harsh and unforgiving. Attila grew up with this toughness. Every morning he would emerge from his tent, waking to the roar of the wind, gazing at the endless horizon of the grasslands. As a young boy, he learned to shoot arrows and fight on horseback. But this education didn't happen in classrooms. No, the steppe itself was his teacher. He witnessed where the wind would blow, how animals were hunted, and how to defeat enemies. These lessons didn't just give him physical strength, they sharpened his mind as well. He was a child who knew how to survive on the steppe and how to achieve victory. In the traditions of the Huns, it was essential for the youth to master the art of war. Attila and Bleda trained with bows and arrows from a young age, but it wasn't just about wielding weapons. A person of the steppe didn't defeat their enemy solely with a sword. They weakened them, patiently waited, and looked for the right moment. Attila learned this well. He wouldn't just be a warrior, he was destined to become a master strategist. Now picture this, the two brothers, Attila and Bleda, frequently rode across the steppes on horseback during their youth. Every day was a new adventure for them, But these adventures were preparing them for the future. Each raid, every hunt, every mock battle honed their military skills. Attila, in particular, became the favorite of their father, Manzuk. His father taught him that being a good leader wasn't just about being a great warrior. A good leader must understand both their people and their enemies. They should be able to guide their folks and stand in the front lines when necessary to empower them. Attila grew up with this deep wisdom, never forgetting his father's words. But sadly, childhood doesn't last forever, does it? One day came and Attila grew up. He was now a young man. After their father's death, Attila and Bleda faced a choice. They had to take the throne and govern the empire, but this was no easy task. The Hunnic Empire was under immense pressure both internally and externally. Barbarian tribes were constantly attacking, and the Roman Empire posed a significant threat to the Huns. The throne carried great responsibility, and the two brothers had to share that burden. At first, Attila and Bleda ruled the Hunnic Empire together. Yes, for a time, the brothers united their powers. However, as you know, struggles for the throne are never simple. Governing the empire together wasn't easy for two leaders to sit in the same tent. Over time, tension began to build between the brothers. Attila was always the more visionary, more aggressive one, while Bleda was more cautious. Ah, my children, come a little closer to the fire because now I'm going to tell you a story about Attila's youth and the Hunnic Empire's confrontation with the Eastern Roman Empire, known back then as Byzantium. This isn't just a tale of war. It's a story that shows how intelligence, strategy, and ultimately power emerged. Let me tell you about the famous treaty between Attila, his brother Bleda, and Byzantium. Close your eyes and listen to the rustle of the wind and the sound of horses' hooves. After Attila and Bleda took charge of the Hunnic Empire, their power began to grow rapidly. But this power had to be gained not only on the battlefield but also at the diplomacy table. And that's where Byzantium comes into play. The Byzantine Empire, that great, magnificent city of Constantinople. At that time, the Eastern Roman Empire was still strong but cornered. The name of the Huns was whispered in the halls of imperial palaces, known for their ruthless and unstoppable nature. When Attila and Bleda faced the Byzantines, they started to play their diplomatic cards. But this wasn't just an easy meeting at the table. The Byzantine Empire had to make a choice, either submit to the Huns or face the possibility of being crushed under the weight of their horses. The Huns were looking for opportunities to attack Byzantium, but these weren't simple raids. Each campaign prepared the ground for the next move. Attila and Bleda, especially Attila, were leaders who fought not just with their swords but with their minds. Then came that day. A significant treaty was signed by the banks of the Margus River. Oh, my children, this was no ordinary treaty. It marked a disaster for Byzantium and the beginning of a great victory for the Huns. Byzantium had to bow down to the Huns. The conditions of the treaty were heavy enough to break Byzantium's back. Just imagine an empire that viewed the Huns as barbarians now had to submit to the very people they looked down upon. According to the treaty, Byzantium was required to pay the Huns a large tribute. And I'm not talking about a small sum here. Byzantium had to send thousands of gold coins to the Huns every year. Those gold coins. As the Byzantine treasury rapidly emptied, the Hunnic Empire grew richer by the day. This wasn't just about money, it was a matter that shattered the pride of Byzantium. The Huns didn't just take gold, they also took control of Byzantine lands. Under the terms of the Margus Treaty, many regions along Byzantium's eastern border were now under Hunnic domination. Yes, losing territory was part of this agreement. Byzantium had to give up the lands the Huns wanted, or else their armies would be ready to march to the gates of Constantinople. But you should know that Attila didn't just settle for tribute and land. No. He deepened this treaty further. He diplomatically cornered Byzantium. Another important condition of the treaty was that Byzantium had to return refugees fleeing from the Huns. Yes, there were people escaping the Huns, rich folks, merchants, warriors. But Attila didn't forgive them. For him, reclaiming those who had sought refuge at the gates of Byzantium was a matter of pride. So everyone who had fled was sent back, and once again, the strength of the Hunnic Empire was displayed across Europe. Attila sent a clear message to his people. No one could escape the Huns. Those who fled would eventually return and be punished. At that time, the Byzantine Emperor Theodosius II had no choice but to accept these terms. Fear and anxiety ruled in the imperial palace. The people of Byzantium trembled when speaking of the Huns. Thanks to this treaty, Attila and Bleda had placed a heavy chain around Byzantium's neck. But this chain was just the beginning. Attila was patient. He saw Byzantium's weaknesses and would use that weakness to the fullest when the time was right. And so, my children, the Margus Treaty wasn't just a peace agreement, It symbolized one nation subjugating another. The Huns showed their strength not just with swords, but through diplomacy as well. With this treaty, Attila and Bleda took the Hunnic Empire one step closer to greatness. But remember, this story doesn't end here. It's only the beginning. Attila was just getting ready for his grand moves. Patience, my children, patience. There's so much more to tell. Stay by the fire and keep listening, because in the next story, I'll tell you how Attila ruled the empire alone and what he did to bring Byzantium and Rome to their knees. Get ready to hear how the Huns shone in the skies and made Europe tremble. My children. The story I'm about to share is one of the turning points in history. Attila had ruled the Hunnic Empire alongside his brother Bleda for a long time, but fate was preparing to separate these two brothers. A time came when Attila was no longer just a brother or a ruler. He became the sole master of the empire, the manager of destiny. Now I'll tell you about Bleda's death and how Attila came to absolute power. Close your eyes again. Let's return to those windswept steps and uncover the true events. When Attila and Bleda were jointly ruling the Hunnic Empire, they may have seemed united against the outside world, but inside there was an unseen tension between the two brothers. This was more than just a simple struggle for the throne. Attila's ambition, his vision, and his desire to take the Hunnic people further set him apart from his brother Bleda. Bleda was more traditional and cautious. Attila, on the other hand, always wanted to push further to achieve greater victories. The fire within him drove him relentlessly forward. Above all, Attila was a warrior, but he sought victory not just on the battlefield, but also in mind, strategy, and diplomacy. One day, that inevitable day came. News of Bleda's death spread through the Hunnic camp. Now let me tell you, my children, historians can't agree on exactly how this death occurred. Some say Bleda died of natural causes, while others claim Attila eliminated his brother to rule the empire alone. But whatever the truth, the fact is that Bleda was dead, and there was now only one name at the head of the Hunnic Empire, Attila. From that moment on, Attila became the sole ruler of the Huns. That day marked the beginning of a new era in Hunnic history. No one could stand in Attila's way now. His ambition, intelligence, and determination would make him not just a leader, but a legend. After Bleda's death, Attila took full control of the Hunnic Empire. However, his style of leadership was very different from Bleda's. While Bleda followed a more peaceful policy, Attila was focused entirely on conquest and power. As soon as he ascended the Hunnic throne, he began reshaping the empire. His first task was to make the Hunnic army stronger, more disciplined, and more organized. At that time, the Huns were already a feared force, but under Attila's leadership, that power multiplied. Under his command, the Hunnic armies moved with not just speed and ferocity, but also strategy and discipline. Attila taught his army new tactics, better equipped his warriors, and consistently exploited his enemies' weaknesses. But Attila wasn't just a leader who won victories on the battlefield, he was also a great politician. While managing the empire, he placed great importance on diplomacy. His policies aimed to weaken his enemies both from within and outside. The Roman Empire, Byzantium, and other European kingdoms found themselves powerless against Attila's cunning. His strategy was built on dividing his enemies, pitting them against each other, and waiting for their weak moments. Thanks to these policies, Attila not only expanded the Hunnic Empire but also became the nightmare of his enemies. Attila's rise to power wasn't limited to military victories. He also changed the political balance in Europe. At that time, there was a major struggle between the Western and Eastern Roman empires. Attila used this conflict to his advantage, inciting both empires against each other. He even managed to control both great empires at times by making agreements with Roman generals and Byzantine courts. But these agreements were just part of Attila's brilliance. Even while making treaties, he was planning his next big move. For Attila, every diplomatic victory was a precursor to military successes. After his brother Bleda's death, Attila began to rule the Hunnic Empire with an iron fist. But this iron fist wasn't just for his enemies. Attila also crushed internal dissent and showed no mercy to traitors. He established order within the empire and managed to keep his people united. Under his leadership, the Huns became one body, one spirit. What held this unity together was Attila's determination and vision. Under his command, the Huns transformed from a nomadic people into an empire. With his leadership, the winds of the steppes blew stronger, and the voices of Hunnic horsemen grew louder. Under Attila's rule, the Hunnic Empire became the strongest state in Europe. His military and diplomatic victories influenced not only the Hunnic people, but all of Europe. Attila became not just the leader of wars, but also a savior, a legend in the eyes of his people. His absolute power was a force that drew the attention of everyone, from Rome to Byzantium, and from Germanic tribes to the Goths. He was a leader who changed the course of history. Ah, my children, I will tell you next time about what Attila did with this absolute power, and how he spread terror across Europe. Because his story isn't over yet. Toss another log on the fire, there are many more stories to share. I can't wait to tell you how, while Attila's name echoed throughout Europe, the nights in the Byzantine palaces were filled with fear, and how Rome would tremble. Ah, gather around the fire, my children, because I'm about to tell you the tale of Attila, the great leader of the Huns, and his infamous attacks against the Byzantines. This story is not just about battles, but also about strategies, fears, and compromises. Attila conquered not only with his sword, but also with his mind. And here's where you'll see how the Byzantine Empire had no choice but to bow before him. Once Attila became the sole leader of the Hun Empire, he was eager to show his strength and expand his realm even further. He had a massive army, but keeping it on the defensive wasn't enough for him. His eyes were always set on the horizon, and one of his biggest targets was Byzantium. Ah, Byzantium, back then known as the Eastern Roman Empire. This empire, with its glorious Roman legacy, caught Attila's attention with its wealth and splendor. By bringing Byzantium under his control, Attila wouldn't just score a victory, he would cement his name in history as a legendary conqueror who defeated the greatest empire in Europe. When Attila launched his initial assaults on Byzantium, the Balkans were thrown into chaos. The Balkans were a rich and strategic region for Byzantium, but Attila's army swept through like a storm. No one could withstand the speed and ferocity of the Hun cavalry. Attila not only defeated the Byzantine armies, but also ravaged the land. Ah, the devastation. Villages and towns fell one after another. Attila's forces burned everything in their path, leaving the people in fear and panic. Families fled, abandoning their homes and possessions. The Balkans had turned into a hell under Attila's wrath. And this was just the beginning. Attila's main target was that magnificent city, Constantinople. The Byzantine emperor, Theodosius II, found himself at a loss over how to respond to Attila's attacks. He was losing his armies on one side while unrest grew among his people on the other. The walls of Constantinople were strong, but even they wouldn't be enough to stop Attila's forces. As the Huns approached the city with their horses, fear spread like wildfire. Attila approached Byzantium mercilessly, threatening to sack the city. The people behind those walls prayed day and night for their city's salvation. But Theodosius knew he couldn't defend the city against Attila's might. The strength of the Hun army was beyond what Byzantium could have ever anticipated. Then the day came. Byzantium had to accept Attila's demands. This is where the Treaty of Anatolius came into play. This treaty signified a massive defeat for Byzantium. Following his victories in the Balkans, Attila had cornered them and extracted heavy reparations from the empire. Byzantium had no choice but to agree to pay large sums of gold to the Huns each year. But these payments were much more than ordinary tributes. The treaty would nearly drain the Byzantine treasury. The gold that flowed from Byzantium caused significant damage to the empire's economy. Emperor Theodosius hoped that by making these payments annually he could calm Attila's wrath. But for Attila, this gold was just the beginning. He had broken Byzantium's power and deepened the fear within Constantinople. The Treaty of Anatolius wasn't just about gold either. Byzantium had to cede more territory to Attila's army. With this treaty, the Huns expanded their dominance in the Balkans even further. Attila had brought Byzantium to its knees with this diplomatic victory. Every move Byzantium made showed that they had no strength to counter Attila's cunning. Under pressure, Byzantium was forced to return refugees, trade with the Huns, and relinquish some regions of its own territory to Hun control. But let me tell you, my children, this treaty didn't stop Attila. No, it was merely a pause. Attila saw the weakness in Byzantium. With every gold piece paid and every reparation delivered, his power and reputation grew. The people of Byzantium were filled with fear at the mere mention of his name. And although Theodosius had to accept the heavy conditions of this treaty, he knew Attila's appetite was far from sated. His sights were set not just on the gold of Byzantium, but on even greater victories. The Treaty of Anatolius went down in history as a symbol of defeat for Byzantium. With this treaty, Attila had brought not just an army but an entire empire to its knees. But remember, my children, behind these victories lay not just swords, but also great strategy and intelligence. Attila knew how to see the weaknesses of his enemies and exploit them. It was this ability that changed the fate of all Europe. We're not done with Attila's victories yet. The ravaging of the Balkans and Byzantium's heavy defeat were just the beginning. Attila now had his eyes set on the Western Roman Empire. I can't wait to tell you about the great assault he planned on Rome's heart and how Europe would tremble. So gather closer to the fire, for the next tale will take us to the very gates of the Roman Empire. My children, toss a bit more wood onto the fire and gather around, because now I'm going to tell you about an event that changed the course of history. It's the story of Attila's first encounter with the Western Roman Empire and that famous campaign in Gaul. But this wasn't just any campaign. It was a seed planted in the heart of Europe, born from a woman's desperate desire, and it heralded a great storm. Before we begin, close your eyes and picture that era, the days when Rome was crumbling, but still trying to stand tall. And during this time there was a name feared throughout Europe: Attila. Attila's first contact with the Western Romans began with an unexpected event. This incident is remembered as one of the most intriguing diplomatic moves in history. It all started with Honoria, the sister of Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III. Honoria was one of the noblest women in Rome, but her life felt like living in a cage within the palace walls. Trapped by her brother's political decisions and family control, she yearned for freedom. One day, this noblewoman, overwhelmed by despair, devised a desperate plan. She had heard of Attila, the powerful leader in Europe, but perhaps she never imagined the consequences of reaching out to him. Yet, she sent a message to Attila, along with a ring. Yes, my children, Honoria proposed marriage to Attila. My children, can you imagine? A Roman princess proposing to the most feared leader in the world. Was it brave or foolish? Perhaps it was both. But Attila saw this proposal as a grand opportunity. He didn't just view Honoria's message as a personal marriage proposal, it was a chance to open the doors of the Western Roman Empire. When Attila accepted Honoria's proposal, he was also claiming rights over a part of the Western Roman Empire. According to Roman traditions, marrying a noblewoman meant inheriting her rights. Attila began to use Honoria's move to demand a piece of land from the Western Romans. But the Roman court was plunged into deep horror. Emperor Valentinian III struggled to cope with his sister's dangerous game, unsure of how to respond to the demands of Attila, the empire's greatest enemy. Attila, however, was not impatient. He was taking bold steps toward his goal. Honoria's actions set off a chain of events that would alter the course of European history. And here begins Attila's campaign in Gaul. This campaign against the Western Romans showcased just how determined and powerful he was. In 451, Attila invaded Western Roman territory with a massive army. His target was to pave the way to the heart of Rome, but the most strategic point for this campaign was the land of Gaul. At that time, Gaul was one of the richest and most important regions of the Western Roman Empire. Attila knew he had to conquer Gaul first to subdue Rome. As Attila gathered his army and entered Gaul, the people of that land trembled in fear. The Huns were famous for their speed and ferocity. Attila's forces swept through Gaul like a storm, breaking through the Western Romans' defensive lines. Towns and cities fell one after another to the Huns. Important cities like Orleans, Troyes, and Reims had no choice but to kneel before Attila's army. These attacks plunged daggers into the heart of the Roman Empire. But my children, let me share a secret. Attila didn't just conquer with the sword, he conquered with his mind too. His campaign in Gaul was just a step toward completely subjugating Rome. Attila had seen Rome's weaknesses and knew how to exploit them. This attack in Gaul was a strategic move to weaken the Western Roman forces. Roman generals struggled to counter Attila's might. The Western Roman Empire, beset by internal conflicts and a weakening economy, was not in a position to withstand such a significant assault. But my children, this is where one of history's greatest battles took place, the Battle of Chalons. Ah, my children, gather round and throw a bit more wood on the fire. Because now I'm about to tell you about perhaps the greatest and bloodiest battle in history, the Battle of Catalaunian Plains. This was a battle that would change the world forever. In this land, where even the wind blew with fear, two great powers faced off: Attila's Hunnic army and the Western Roman Empire along with its allies. Are you ready? We're stepping onto the battlefield now. Shields will clash, horses will neigh, swords will gleam. We will make the roar of this battle heard all around the world. It was the summer of 451. Attila was advancing swiftly through Gaul. The Huns were sweeping through, like a hurricane, taking down Rome's richest territories one after another. But during those days, one of the most talented generals of the Western Roman Empire was preparing to make a move that would etch his name in history. His name was Flavius Aetius. At that time, Rome couldn't stand against Attila on its own, but Aetius, using his wit and diplomatic skills, rallied the Germanic tribes, especially the Visigoths, to his side. This meant that Rome's fate depended not only on its own armies, but also on the fighting spirit of these strong allies. Attila, however, was well aware of this united force he would face. But his goal wasn't just conquest, he aimed to completely subjugate Rome. In Gaul, Attila's army was ready to bring all of Rome's fears to life. The Hunnic warriors under his command were like a machine of death. When they stepped onto the battlefield, they felt neither fear nor mercy. Attila gathered his forces, and the big day had arrived. The Catalaunian Plains would be the stage for a battle that would mark history. This land had never witnessed such a war. The Roman legions and their allies stood like a wall against Attila's army. Picture it in your minds, my children. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, swords drawn, shouting war cries. The air was thick with the scent of blood, the sun shone brightly, yet that light seemed insufficient to illuminate the horror of this battle. Attila, in his war chariot, fixed his gaze on the Roman army across the vast plain. He was a leader, but also a warrior. Attila would never retreat, never know fear. He believed that victory would always be on his side, no matter what. The battle began with the first light of dawn. Swords, spears, arrows. Both sides charged at each other with fierce rage. Attila's Hunnic warriors were known for their brutality. To face them was like walking to your death. The Hunnic archers rained down arrows on the Roman troops like a storm. But the Roman army was determined too. Aetius strategically positioned his men to meet Attila's attacks. And in that moment, the most powerful ally of Rome, Visigoth King Theoderic, made a move that would change the tide of the battle. The Visigoths struck a significant blow to the right flank of Attila's army. This began to disrupt the Hunnic battle formation. But the battle was so immense that both sides suffered great losses for hours. The battlefield was littered with bodies. Attila directed the fight with all his cunning. He didn't think about retreating for a second. For Attila, this was not just a battle, it was a struggle that would determine the fate of Europe. If Rome fell, the West would completely fall under Hunnic domination. However, the course of the battle did not go as Attila had expected. The Visigoths were showing strong resistance against the Huns. Theoderic fought bravely and inspired his men. Sadly, at one point during the battle, King Theoderic was killed. His death was a huge loss for the Allies, but it also fueled their fury even more. Theoderic's son continued to spill blood on the battlefield to avenge his father. Ah, my children, at this point the most critical moment of the battle arrived. Attila regrouped his forces and prepared for a final assault. With all his strength, he launched another attack against Rome and its allies. But here, Flavius Aetius's genius shone through. The Roman army had set up a solid defense line to counter this major assault. The Huns charged with great fury, but this time they crashed against the Roman shields. Attila ordered his troops to press harder, but the allied forces stood their ground and stopped Attila's last charge. And so at the end of the battle, Attila had to retreat. But remember, this was not a defeat. No, my children, Attila had not truly been vanquished. He had merely made a strategic withdrawal. The Battle of Catalaunian Plains ended with heavy losses on both sides. But this battle did not end Attila's legend of invincibility. He withdrew to regroup and plan his next attack. Now, think about this, my children. This great battle changed the course of history. If Attila had achieved a complete victory on the Catalaunian Plains, perhaps the history of Western Europe would be entirely different today. Rome managed to withstand the Huns' assault once again, but that was not the end of their resistance. Even though Attila retreated, he remained a formidable force. He would return for vengeance, and the Western Roman Empire would once again face his wrath. So sit a little closer to the fire, because Attila's story doesn't end here. In the next tale, I will tell you how Attila moved into Italy, faced the Pope, and influenced the fate of Rome. Ah, my children, the story of Attila will be told throughout history, and his name will always be remembered. Ah, my children, now we come to Attila's final grand move in Italy, that unforgettable campaign, and that critical moment as he drew closer to Rome. As one of history's greatest commanders, Attila was marching from victory to victory, yet he was about to face a day when he would have to bow to fate shaped by the gods. The Italian campaign marked an unforgettable turning point, both militarily and diplomatically. To those who lived through it, Attila was like a hurricane, sweeping everything in his path and redrawing the world's borders. But at the eye of this storm lay the intellect and deep strategic thinking of a great leader. Before launching his Italian campaign, Attila's eyes were firmly set on Rome. He had been halted at the Battle of Chalons, but he would not accept that defeat. For the Hun king, a setback was merely the precursor to another victory. And this victory would bear the name of Rome. In 452, Attila set out once again with his army, and this time his target was directly the heart of Rome. That great imperial city had withstood many assaults over the centuries, but never one like this. As Attila entered northern Italy, he moved like a firestorm. Cities fell one after another before him. Aquileia. Ah, that great city. How magnificent it once was. The heart of trade, famous for its ports, Aquileia was obliterated by Attila's attack. The city's walls crumbled before his armies. Women, children, the elderly, all faced Attila's wrath. In an instant, this great city turned to ashes, and Attila's forces continued onward. As the cities of Italy fell one by one, the people of Rome waited in terror. Padova, Verona, Milan. Attila's armies did not stop there either. Cities knelt before their enemies. The people of Rome were in a state of panic, unsure of what to do. Emperor Valentinian III was writhing in despair, for he had neither the army nor the strength to resist Attila. The defenseless state of Rome did not escape Attila's keen eye. That great city was now just a step away from the Hun king. And then came that critical moment. Attila had camped just a few days away from Rome. The conquest of the city was imminent. But here, one of history's most unexpected events unfolded. Attila's approach to Rome sent tremors of fear not only through the city but throughout the entire Christian world. The fall of Rome would not only mean the end of an empire but a blow to a faith as well. It was at this point that a figure stepped onto the stage to change the course of history: Pope Leo I. Ah, my children, now close your eyes and imagine that great meeting. Attila stood at the gates of Rome with his massive army. A whisper spread through the city: the Pope will meet Attila. No one was hopeful about this meeting. Who could imagine that a simple spiritual leader could stop the world's most powerful ruler? But Pope Leo I set out fearlessly. With just a few companions, he advanced toward Attila's camp. When Pope Leo entered Attila's tent with humble and calm steps, history held its breath. This meeting was so monumental that many have debated its outcome ever since. No one knows exactly what was discussed between Pope Leo and Attila. Perhaps this meeting was about more than just words. Maybe a divine force intervened. However, one thing is certain: Attila was profoundly affected by the Pope's words, so much so that he decided to withdraw his army. Now, this may be hard to understand, my children. Attila was a leader who brought the world to its knees, instilling fear in empires. And yet, standing before Rome, he accepted the idea of retreat. Some say Attila's decision to pull back stemmed from diseases that had begun to spread in his ranks. Yes, the hot climate and harsh conditions of Italy had worn down the Hun army. But there was another reason. Attila was a king who understood the power of both armies and words through his diplomatic acumen. Conquering Rome would have crowned him with a great victory in the short term, but perhaps influenced by Pope Leo, he saw the wisdom in retreating without taking the city. As a result of this meeting, Attila chose to withdraw from Italy without capturing Rome. History may record this decision as a miraculous event. Thanks to this, the Western Roman Empire would survive a while longer. Pope Leo's bravery saved Rome and was celebrated as a significant victory in the Christian world. But remember this, my children: this retreat did not signify Attila's weakness. He remained powerful, and the fate of empires still rested in his hands. After the Italian campaign, Attila's name continued to be spoken with fear. The military outcomes of this campaign had once again solidified the power of the Hun Empire. Rome's weakness and helplessness sent shock waves through the Western world. Attila proved once again that he was not only a conqueror but also a master of diplomacy and strategy. His meeting with the Pope went down in history as one of its most striking moments. And so, my children, Attila's campaign in Italy was not just a struggle of armies, but a battle of words, beliefs, and minds. Although Attila did not conquer Rome, the results of this campaign accelerated the inevitable downfall of the Western Roman Empire. Italy suffered a great blow during that time and never regained its former glory. Yet Pope Leo's courageous stance became a beacon of human strength, even in the shadow of Attila. Ah, my children, now we come to those final, unexpected moments in Attila's life. We're about to witness the extraordinary end of this great leader, the powerful ruler known as the Scourge of God, who struck fear into hearts around the world. Attila was undefeated on the battlefield, a conqueror of empires. But fate sometimes has surprising endings in store, even for the mightiest. His story concluded not in war or a coup, but on his wedding night. How strange is that, right? The events surrounding Attila's death have sparked debates among historians for years. It was a spring night in 453. Attila had recently married. Yes, this wasn't his first marriage. As a powerful ruler, he had often taken women from strong dynasties to forge alliances. But this time felt especially different. According to old Hun traditions, weddings were celebrated with grand festivities. That night, Attila was celebrating his union with his new wife, Ildiko. Ildiko was renowned for her beauty, but little did they know that night would be Attila's last. Now, my children, let's pause here for a moment and reflect. Imagine a leader who spent his life conquering and winning battles, taking his last breath in his own wedding bed. It's astonishing, isn't it? That's why many theories have emerged about Attila's death. What led this powerful ruler to die not on the battlefield but in his own bed? Historical records suggest that the earliest accounts say Attila died from excessive bleeding. It's said that on his wedding night he hosted a lavish feast. After dinner he retired to his room, where his nose began to bleed. Yet, the mighty warrior who had faced many battles didn't perish from a wound or an illness. That night, blood kept flowing from his nose. It didn't stop throughout the night, and Attila quietly passed away in bed. This bleeding was an odd way for even the Huns of that era to die. The fact that such a powerful man could die from such a mundane cause bewildered his people. Now, let me ask you this: was this truly just a coincidence? Was it really a decision that a man like Attila met his end because of a nosebleed, or was there a darker secret hidden behind it? Some historical accounts offer different explanations for Attila's death. One theory suggests that he may have been poisoned. According to this view, Ildiko, who was closest to him, might have been part of an assassination plot. A young woman approached the greatest ruler of the Huns and poisoned him to death. Of course, this remains just a rumor, but such stories have been told for centuries. The sudden and quiet nature of Attila's death planted seeds of doubt in everyone's mind. Another theory posits that Attila's death was not from murder but perhaps a natural event or a sign from God. Some sources link this death to Attila becoming a more arrogant leader, growing bold enough to challenge the divine. The scourge of God might have been stopped by God himself. This perspective suggests that Attila's victories had now brought him divine retribution, and his death was a warning. However, the most plausible explanation seems to be that Attila died from a natural cause like a heart attack or stroke. He was a great warrior, but his body carried the burdens of years of war, stress, and fatigue. During a grand celebration like his wedding night, perhaps that burden became too heavy and took him down. Whatever the theories may be, Attila's death will always remain shrouded in mystery. With Attila's death, the Hun Empire began to fade as well. That great war machine, once headless, never regained its former strength. Power struggles among Attila's sons weakened the empire rapidly. Attila's death was not just the end of one man, it marked the decline of an entire empire. And so, my children, one of history's greatest leaders, Attila, did not fall in battle or through a coup. He passed away quietly in his bed on his wedding night. This story shows just how unpredictable history can be. Even the death of a leader like Attila offers us lessons. Power and might are never absolute. Even the strongest ruler can fall at the most unexpected moment. Ah, my children. Now let's reflect on that great leader. We're going to talk about Attila, a ruler who left a deep mark on humanity's memory for centuries, and how he earned the title Scourge of God. Attila was more than just a name, he was a turning point in history, a legend that struck fear into hearts every time his name was spoken. So what made him so significant? What events, myths, and terrifying tales spread among the people contributed to making him Scourge of God? First, you should know that Attila wasn't just a warrior. He was a builder of empires, a master strategist, and a political genius. During his time, the Roman Empire was weakening in both the East and the West. Yet Attila managed to shake the very foundations of this massive structure that Rome had built over centuries. As the leader of the Huns, he made his mark not only with his sword but also with his intelligence. Think about it. Here was a leader who could force both the Eastern and Western Roman empires to bow down at the same time. Back then, both empires were considered among the world's most powerful states. But Attila made the Eastern Roman Empire pay tribute and instilled great fear in the Western Empire. He was the man who targeted the heart of Rome and made its supposedly unbreakable walls tremble. But how did he earn the title Scourge of God? The meaning behind this title goes much deeper than just Attila himself. According to belief, Attila was seen as a punisher sent by God. The Christian world at the time began to view the weakening of the Roman Empire and Attila's victories as a form of divine punishment. Every step Attila took seemed like a reflection of God's wrath on earth. Many interpreted his victories as a divine intervention. In fact, some church leaders even spread the idea that Attila was a sword, a whip sent by God to the world. That's why Attila was seen not just as a warrior, but as a punishment sent by God. The legend that carved Attila's name into history was fueled not just by his military successes, but also by the terror he created. In the West, especially in Rome, the arrival of Attila was seen as a disaster. His armies would set fire to the lands they conquered, destroying cities. When Attila's name was mentioned, waves of fear would sweep through the populous cities, would shut their gates, and people would lock themselves away in churches and temples. This terrifying reputation only grew his legend, for he was not just a conqueror but a leader who left dread in his wake. But the legends didn't stop there, my children. Attila also had a mystical side. Those who admired his justice and decisions believed he was not just a king but a kind of holy messenger. Attila never acted arbitrarily, he always made wise and calculated decisions. These traits contributed to his being seen as a hero among his people and an unstoppable force among his enemies. To everyone, he was a ruler fulfilling the tasks given to him by God. Another reason Attila became such an important figure in history was his challenge to the world order of his time. He was one of the rare leaders who could bring down a powerful structure like the Roman Empire. He faced their massive armies, disrupted their trade routes, plundered their great cities, and made their emperors bow before him. When Attila proved to be the only power that could stand against Rome, he guaranteed his place in history. However, my children, this story isn't just about military victories and battlefields. What truly made Attila great was his mastery of diplomacy. Yes, he won many wars, but he saw war as just one option. The treaties he made with Rome demonstrated the great diplomatic power of the Huns. Attila was not only a master of the sword but also a brilliant strategist. By making the right decisions at the right times, he secured victories both on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. In conclusion, Attila's significance in history arises not just from being a ruler or a warrior, but from the immense impact and fear he created. He was a leader who brought down some of the most powerful empires of his time, became a legendary figure among peoples, and inspired both allies and enemies. Even after his death, his name remained unforgettable for centuries. Even today, when we hear Attila, the first things that come to mind are power, might, and victory, aren't they? So, my children, Attila was not just a leader, he was one of the greatest legends in history. He was remembered as the scourge of God, a title that etched him into history. His life, his victories, defeats, and death remind us how fleeting power and might can be. But they also teach us what a strong will can achieve in changing the course of history. Rather than just being a page in history books, he has been engraved in our minds as an endless story. And as this story continues to be told, Attila's legend will never fade. Ah, my children, we've now come to the end of this long and tumultuous tale. Our journey following in the footsteps of Attila was not just the story of one man, but of an entire era. As we sift through the dusty pages of history, we've witnessed not only the fear he instilled, but also his awe-inspiring determination and strength. No matter how much time passes, Attila's name will continue to resonate and be remembered as a turning point in human history. But what's truly important in this story isn't just the battles or treaties. It's the legacy he left behind.
Think about it. If Attila were merely a warrior swinging a sword, would he be remembered for so long? No, he left an impact not just on the battlefields, but in the minds and fears of people as well. With each encounter, he came up with a new move, a new strategy, defeating his enemies both on the field and at the negotiating table. Yet we must remember, like all great leaders, Attila was ultimately mortal. Even his death became legendary. Yes, he might be known as God's whip, but the mystery surrounding his death granted him a kind of immortality.
Now, does this story end here? Attila's life and conquests may have come to a close, but his name still echoes in history books. We are here discussing him, drawing lessons from his life. Even centuries later, the mention of Attila shows that the dread he inspired left a significant mark. Attila's story is not just the tale of a leader. His name symbolizes an entire era, the last gasps of the Roman Empire, the rise of a man from the dark forests of Central Europe who brought mighty empires to their knees. But above all, Attila's life reveals a great truth: you can be powerful, you can be fearsome, but the course of history is shaped not just by the lands you conquer, but by the memories you leave in people's minds. That's why Attila is unforgettable. We must also learn from this unforgettable story, my children. Every leader, every hero is ultimately mortal. But the legacy they leave makes them immortal. And so Attila's legacy will live on forever. As this story continues to be told, the echoes of that great leader known as God's whip will never fade. And so, my children, this night comes to a close, but history never truly ends. As you wander through the pages of the past, you'll always find new stories. And remember, behind every story are great lessons. Take the lessons of Attila and carry them forward. Now, stoke the fire a little more, for there are other stories to tell. There are many great heroes and rulers roaming this world. But tonight we've reached the end of a journey filled with the footprints of Attila. I hope this story has been a light for you. I see the spark in your eyes. So you're ready to embark on a journey through the depths of history. This is just the beginning. Many rulers like Attila, many great leaders await us. But for tonight, we pause here to send a salute to that legendary ruler of history. Listen closely and remember, the whispers of the past will always guide us.